morning. We're in Yeshaya, Sefer Yeshaya. We're up to Perek Yutes. Last week we learned Perek Yutes about Melchemes, part of the prophecy of Yeshaya about Melchemes Gog and Magog. And we've had several prakim that begin with the word Masa. Masa is a word that introduces a nevuah, but it introduces a nevuah that's a masa, it's a burden. It's not going to be a positive nevuah about who it's being said. We had a masa about the Philistines, masa Pelishtim. We had a masa on Ashur. We had masa on Damasek. And now we're going to masa Mitzrayim. I very often quote the Gemara in Megillah and Daf Yudalit. The Gemara there says that in the history of the Jewish people, there were 48 prophets, Nevi'im, and 7 Nevi'ot, 7 female Nevi'im. The Gemara there lists the 7 female Nevi'ot, and the female Nevi'im, and does not list the 48 men. Rashi lists the 48 men. There's a question about a Girsa in Rashi. The Vilna and take some out, put some in. At any rate, the Gemara then asks a question. We learn out from a pasuk that there were thousands upon thousands of people who were Nevi'im. So why does the Gemara say that there were only 48 male Nevi'im? The Gemara says, Nevuah shechutzu choladayras nichtava, a nevuah that was said and that has a lesson in it, a message for all generations. The Rebbeinu Shalom instructed the Navi to write it down so that all generations can learn that book and understand it door to door and understand the message of it in every generation. Nevuah shaloy a nevuah that was not needed for all generations. It was time sensitive. It was something that a Navi said that only dealt and had a message for his time. So those things were not, the Rebbeinu Shalom did not instruct those Nevi'im to write down their books because there wasn't a message in it for future generations. So in terms of the Nevi'im that have a message given to them by God, which is relevant to all generations, those books are written down. So Sefer Yeshaya, every nevuah in Sefer Yeshaya, means it has a message in it for every generation. Sometimes, as I mentioned last week, the weeks before, it is difficult to find exactly the message that's relevant for every generation. When Yeshaya prophesies about the fall of Assyria, the Assyrian kingdom fell in the days of Yeshayahu. It was over, it's gone. What is the need? What is the lesson that can be learned from the fall of the Assyrian kingdom in the days of Yeshayahu? And how would you apply that message today? So that is a difficult question, but there is an answer. Because if it wasn't a message for all generations, it wouldn't be in the book of Yeshayahu. I say that because we're coming now to the chapter of Masa Mitzrayim, a nevuah about the fall of Mitzrayim. When we think about the fall of Mitzrayim, we think about the fall of Mitzrayim after the Jews left Mitzrayim in the year 2448. But Yeshaya would not be talking about the fall of Mitzrayim in 2448 because Yeshaya is prophesying about the fall of Mitzrayim in the near future. In other words, Yeshaya's time, he's prophesying about the fall of Mitzrayim that's about or going to happen. We'll see what going to happen means. But he's certainly not talking about the year 2448, Al Pi Pshuta. You can't prophesize about something that's happened already. So what exactly is this Perek about? Masa Mitzrayim, a nevuah about the fall of Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim fell in 2448. The Egyptians did rise again on the world stage. They were conquered by the Assyrian king, and just as difficult it is to find a message for the fall of Assyria today, what is the message for the fall of Mitzrayim today? So we're going to see if we can learn this Perek in particular to have relevance to every generation, particularly to our generation. Before we do that, let's turn to page 151. And we're going to read the introduction in the Art Scroll page 151. We're going to read the introduction to chapter 20. We're going to learn chapter 19 today. Let's look at the introduction to chapter 20 because it gives us a historical look at the conflict between Ashur, Assyria, and Mitzrayim, Egypt. We learned about this, excuse me, in Sefer Malachim Beis, that conflict. And here we're going to get a summary and it'll give us a better understanding for chapter 19. So on page 151, historical background of the prophecy. After having conquered the northern kingdom, destroyed its cities, and exiled its people, King Sancherib of Assyria swooped down the kingdom of Judah, in the 14th year of the reign of King Chizkiyahu. So we know that the Assyrian kings destroyed the northern kingdom. The northern kingdom went into exile over 100 years before the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. There was still a southern kingdom in Yerushalayim. And after the Assyrian kings destroyed the northern kingdom and sent the Jews into exile, Sancherib Melech Ashur marched south and conquered much of the area surrounding Yerushalayim itself. And this story occurs in the 14th year of the reign of Chizkiyahu, the great tzaddik, who, as we mentioned so many times, the Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin, actually could have been the Melech HaMashiach. The situation didn't work itself out. In short order, the Assyrians conquered nearly all of Judah, including its fortified cities, and Sancherib was ready to attack Yerushalayim with a huge army. But Yeshaya assured Chizkiyahu that the invader would be forced to postpone his siege by an unexpected crisis in his homeland. So Sancherib is now marching towards Yerushalayim. He's besieged Yerushalayim with a huge army. And this is called Siege 1. This is Assyrian Siege 1. Seeing that Sancherib had left his capital relatively undefended, Sancherib left the Assyrian capital basically undefended. He took his whole army and came down all of Eretz Yisrael all the way to Yerushalayim. King Tircha of Cush used the opportunity to attack Assyria, causing Sancherib to temporarily abandon his siege of Yerushalayim and cope with his northern enemy. Rebbeinu Shalom worked it out as he works through history. The king of Cush, he saw his Assyrian neighbor taking his whole army down to Eretz Yisrael, and the capital of Ashur was left undefended. The king of Cush said this is a perfect opportunity to attack Sancherib and Assyria. Word got back to Sancherib that his capital was going to be attacked. So he temporarily postponed conquering Yerushalayim. He ended Siege 1, took the army back up north to fight with the king of Cush. After defeating Tircha, Sancherib went to war against Cush and Egypt. After Sancherib's army went back up north, they defeated Cush. Cush was being assisted by Egypt. Both Cush and Egypt wanted to knock the Assyrian kingdom off the stage and take the stage as the new world leaders. So they joined forces, Cush and Mitzrayim, and they were going to attack the capital of Ashur. Sancherib got back in time. He defeated both Cush and Mitzrayim, which is important for our Perek today, chapter 19. and dealt them a crushing blow. So where are we now? Sancheriv left Yerushalayim. He ended siege 1, went back up north to defend his country, defeated Cush al Mitzrayim, and then he returned to Yerushalayim with his Egyptian and Cushite captives to complete his conquest of Yehuda, a mission that ended with the great miracle that the entire Assyrian army died overnight. So now that he's defeated Cush and he's defeated Mitzrayim, he takes Egyptians and he takes Cushim and he brings them with him down. Now he's going to either use them as slaves or they're going to be helping the army. He comes down with his army back to Yerushalayim for siege number 2 on Yerushalayim. And it is on the night of Pesach, the great miracle happens that the entire army dies in their sleep. Kadosh Baruch Hu opened the ears of all these Assyrian soldiers. They heard the Malachim saying Shiva, and they all died in their sleep. Sancheriv ran away back up north to his country, where he was assassinated. So that's the basic history we need to know for today's Perek. Ashur, the Assyrian king, went and defeated Mitzrayim, and Egyptian soldiers who had been captured by Sancheriv up north when he was defending his kingdom, he took these Egyptian soldiers back with him down south to assist his soldiers in conquering Yerushalayim, which never happened. So these Egyptian soldiers who were captured up north by Sancheriv were brought down south to the siege of Yerushalayim, and they were eyewitnesses to this unbelievable miracle that the Rebbeinu Shalom wiped out the whole Assyrian army and saved Yerushalayim. These Egyptian captives went back home to Egypt, and they told their countrymen, you can't imagine what we saw. Although Sancheriv conquered us up north, the Egyptian army, the Cush army, Sancheriv was able to crush us. He took us down south, besieged Yerushalayim, not a big city, no army really. In the middle of the night, the whole Assyrian army died. This is an unbelievable God of the Jewish people. And this is the message that the Egyptians brought back home in those days. With that introduction, now let's take a look at Perek Yutes, which begins on page 140. One more introduction. When we talk about the 4 exiles, we always talk about 4 exiles. The Midrashim always talk about 4. Avraham Avinu at the Bris Bein Absarim, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu put sleep on him, saw 4 exiles. In the book of Daniel, the 4 exiles, one point, the 4 exiles, Daniel sees it as Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and he saw this huge human being, gold, silver, copper, steel, and Daniel interprets the dream to be 4 kingdoms. Then Daniel has a vision where he sees 4 different animals, and each animal is one of the 4 kingdoms. There's always the discussion of 4 exiles. And those exiles are the Babylonian exile, the Persian exile, the Greek-Syrian exile, and the Roman exile. Those are the 4 golas: Bavel, Parasmadai, Yavan, and Rome, Edom. In the 4, we do not talk about Mitzrayim. The literal meaning is, the literal understanding is, because exile occurs when you're in your homeland and you're exiled from your homeland, then you have an exile, have a ghost. So after the Jews entered Eretz Yisrael with Yoshua ben Nun, and eventually they built the Beis HaMikdash, The Babylonians burn down the Beis Hamikdash and send Jews out of Eretz Yisrael. That's an exile. The Persians take over from the Babylonians, and they give the Jews permission to come back to Eretz Yisrael and start building Beis Hamikdash. But Jews are now considered an exile because they're under foreign dominion, even in their homeland. And the Beis Hamikdash is only built with the authority of the Persian kings. Let's do a little quick review here of Masechta Midos. You enter Har HaBayis, you walk down Har HaZeisim, you walk down to the Har HaBayis, you're going to enter the eastern gate of the Har HaBayis. The eastern gate of the Har HaBayis is called Shar Shushan Habira. And it was called Shushan Habira as a dedication to the Persian kings who gave, specifically Koresh, Cyrus, who gave the Jews permission to start building the Beis Hamikdash. And whether we did it voluntarily or it was demanded, the eastern gate of the Har HaBayis is called Shushan Habira. So we were under foreign dominion. Our ability to maintain the Beis Hamikdash was only with the permission of the Persians. The same thing happens when the Greeks defeat the Persians. The Greeks dominate the Beis Hamikdash. They defile the Beis Hamikdash. The exile really still continues. The second Beis Hamikdash continues, and the Romans destroy it, and they chase the Jews out of Eretz Yisrael again. So this is how we look at 4 exiles. On the other hand, Mitzrayim, Yaakov and his sons lived in Eretz Yisrael, and they went down. Nobody exiled them. They went down to Mitzrayim because there was a famine. They went to see Yosef, and quote unquote exile from your homeland was not a correct word to use for Mitzrayim. Nevertheless, living in foreign territory is an exile. It's not your homeland. So while there's the simple explanation that Mitzrayim is not one of the 4 exiles because we weren't exiled from a homeland, the homeland became a homeland when Yeshua crossed into Eretz Yisrael. Nevertheless, there is the question about why Mitzrayim is not considered a golus. And some Svarim use the words golus Mitzrayim. So the deeper understanding of this is that Mitzrayim was a prototype. Mitzrayim was the prototype of what an exile is and what it will be. And it was the prototype for the Geula, what a redemption will look like. So if you take a look at the word Mitzrayim, Mitzrayim means meitzar, constricted, pain, sorrow. We say in Hallel, it comes from Tehillim, min hameitzar karasika. I call you, God, out of my constriction, out of my tightness. Mitzrayim is the prototype of what Golus is. Mitzrayim is also the prototype of a redemption from an exile. And this is based on a pasuk. The Art Scroll quotes this pasuk on page 141. In the left-hand column of the Art Scroll, the paragraph that begins Abarbanel notes. Abarbanel notes that there are many similarities between the punishments specified here and those that struck Egypt in the time of Moshe. This comparison is found elsewhere as well, where the Navi Micha prophesied of the time of the final redemption, the redemption that's coming b'mher Yameinu today, Mamish, Be'ezrat Hashem. That final redemption, Micha said, is going to look exactly like, there'll be a mirror image of the way the Jews left Mitzrayim. And Micha said, Ki mei tzeischa me eretz Mitzrayim, ar'enu neflois. I will show you the same kind of neflois. I will show you the same kinds of miracles at the final Geula as I showed you at the first Geula out of Mitzrayim. So if we study, and this is in all the Sforim talk about this in Pasha Shemos, Va'era, Bo, B'Shalach. If you study well, and a lot of Sforim encourage people to be ma'ayin in Pashas Bo, B'Shalach, Yisro, Pashas Bo, Shemos, Va'era, Bo, B'Shalach, even Vayechi, to get an understanding of Golus Mitzrayim and Geulus Mitzrayim, because that's what the Golus and Geula will look like for us. And this is Micha's prophecy. I will show you the miracles for the final redemption that I showed you at the first redemption. We say this in Kedusha as well. There's a concept we say in Kedusha on Shabbos. Acharis Karashis. The last redemption will look like the first redemption. So, understanding it in this way, Mitzrayim is not considered one of the 4 exiles because Mitzrayim is the prototype. It's sort of source material. You study Mitzrayim's Golus and Mitzrayim's Geula, and now you can understand Bavel, Paras Madai, Yavan, and Edom. It is the source material for all the other 4 exiles. Now, having said that, let's turn back again to page 151. This is a page we just read the summary of the history between Assyria and Egypt. In the left-hand column on page 151, there's bold words, Bracha Bekerev Ha'aretz. We're not learning that pasuk right now. And this is what the art scroll says, about 3 lines down. Abarbanel notes, however, that all the prophecies in the chapter, which we're about to learn, chapter 19, regarding Egypt and Assyria, were not fulfilled during the days of Chizkiyahu, nor during the era of the Second Temple. What we're going to learn about today, next week in Me'etz Hashem, Perek Yutes, about the conflict between Egypt and Assyria, and what's going to happen to Egypt and Assyria, and how Egypt is going to turn around and become a God-worshipping people. Why? Because of the history we spoke about a few minutes ago. The Egyptian captives, who are going to be taken by Sancheriv from the north down south to the siege of Yerushalayim. They're going to witness this miracle of all the Assyrian soldiers dying during the middle of the night. They're going to go back to Egypt and tell them, you know, this unbelievable thing. When we were up north, Sancheriv crushed us. And we had Cush with us. We had 2 armies against Sancheriv. We got crushed. We get taken down as captives to Yerushalayim, small city, walled city, no real army. And the soldiers who conquered us up north, they die in their sleep down south when they get close to Yerushalayim. This God is unbelievable. This is the message they bring back to Egypt. And the Egyptians will become a God-worshipping people. This has not happened, Abarbanel points out. The Abarbanel wrote a famous sefer called Yeshua Malko about the coming of Mashiach. And he discusses a lot of the prophecies of Yeshaya. And he goes into these prophecies in great depth. And he says, if you read chapter 19 of Yeshaya, none of this has happened. The Egyptians never became God-fearing people, neither in the days of Chizkiyahu, neither, which is the end of the first Beis HaMikdash, nor during the second Beis HaMikdash. The Abarbanel says all the prophecies in this chapter regarding Egypt and Assyria were not fulfilled during the days of Chizkiyahu, nor during the era of the Second Temple. He therefore suggests, this is the Abarbanel, that these prophecies refer to the Messianic era. These prophecies deal with the days of Mashiach. So we don't know what Assyria is. We know what Egypt is. We also know where Assyria is. But according to the Abarbanel, the chapter we're about to learn is a prophecy of Yeshayahu that is very relevant to us today, which is the question we started with. This is very relevant to us today because this is a prophecy about Egypt that is going to occur in the days of Mashiach. With the history that we read about a few moments ago on page 151. So let's understand what we're going to read now in Perek Yutes. We're going to read a nevuah about Mitzrayim. And keep in the back of your mind or the front of your mind that this nevuah is about the days of Mashiach. And also keep in your mind the fact that Mitzrayim is a prototype. Mitzrayim is Meitzah. Mitzrayim means constricted, tight, oppressed. Mitzrayim is the prototype source material for every exile. You want to study what an exile means, you study Pashas, Vayechi, Shemos, Va'era, Bo, Beshalach. You want to understand Golus and Geula, that's what you study, and through that you'll understand Bavel, Paras Madai, Yavan, Edom. You'll understand our Golus today. So as we're reading the words Masa Mitzrayim, a burdensome nevuah from Mitzrayim, think in your mind that this is Mitzrayim doesn't necessarily mean Egypt. Mitzrayim means the Meitzah, the prototype exile, and how the exile will be turned on its head against those who put us in exile. And as we read the Abarbanel, this is talking about the days of Mashiach. In the days of Mashiach, this prophecy will happen, and it will happen to Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim does not necessarily mean the geographical area of Egypt. Mitzrayim means the prototype of exile. This is what will happen in the exile during the days of the coming of Mashiach Meher Yemei. Page 140, Perek Yutes. Masa Mitzrayim, a burdensome nevuah on Mitzrayim, the prototype, the source for all exiles, during the days of Mashiach. Hinei Hashem rochet al avkal, uvo Mitzrayim, v'nou elile Mitzrayim yiponov, ulavav Mitzrayim yimas bekirbo. English. A prophecy concerning Egypt. Behold, Hashem is riding on a swift cloud and coming to Egypt. Egypt again. Egypt does not have to be the geographical Egypt here. Egypt can mean the oppressors of the Jewish people during the days when Mashiach is coming. Those places where the Jews still remain in exile. The Egyptian false gods will tremble before him, and the heart of Egypt will melt within it. You're going to begin to see now amazing psukim about the very days we're living in, if you understand these introductory points. A, Mitzrayim does not have to be Mitzrayim. It's the prototype Golus, the prototype Geula, as Micha said. In the days of Mashiach, I will show you the same miracles I showed you in Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim was just an example. If we understand the Abarbanel that we're talking about the days of Mashiach, you're going to see fascinating nevuahs that are jumping off the page because we're seeing this, we're reading this, we're witnessing this. Pasuk Beis. V'sichsachti Mitzrayim b'Mitzrayim. V'nilchamu ish ba'oche v'ish b're'eyu. Ir be'ir. Mamlocha b'mamlocha. English. I will cause Egyptians to fight Egyptians. Egyptians does not mean Egyptians. I will cause Europeans to fight Europeans. We're talking about during the days of Mashiach, as the Abarbanel told us. I will cause Americans to fight Americans. Each one will battle his brother and each his fellow. City against city, kingdom against kingdom. Let's take a look at page 143 in the article. Let's go, I'm sorry, page 141 at the bottom, the last comment, pasuk 2. I will cause Egyptians to fight Egyptians. In addition to the attacks of their enemies, Egypt will be plagued. Could be Egypt, America, Europe, Syria, anybody that is in the days of Mashiach. Mitzrayim is just a prototype of exile. Will be plagued by interior strife because God will incite one Egyptian against another, or God will incite one American against another, or God will incite one European against another. Next, page 141, 143, Mamlocha b'mamlocha, kingdom against kingdom. Although Egypt was under the control of one central government, in America that's called the federal government, it may have consisted of many separate states. In America that's called the 50 states, each with its own ruler. In America that's called a governor, and in a city that's called a mayor. And this, although there's a federal government that controls the whole place, there are governors, mayors in many different cities in many different states, and there will be strife amongst the people and strife amongst the states. Back to page 142. Verse 3. V'nafka ruach Mitzrayim b'kirbo v'atzoso avaleya v'doshu el ha'elilim ve'el ha'itim ve'el ha'avos ve'el ha'yid onim v'sikarti es Mitzrayim b'yad adonim koshe u'melech az yimshol bo ne'um ha'adon Hashem tzivakot v'nishsu mayim yahayom v'nahor yecharav yovesh v'heznichu nahorais dolu v'chobu ya'orei motzar kona v'asuf kamelu Oros al Yaor al Pi Yaor. So verse 7. V'chol Mizrahi Yaor Yivash, turning page 144, Nida Veinenu. V'onu hadayagim v'ovlu kal mashlichei v'yaor chaka u'parsein mechmores al pnei mayim umlolu u'boshu ovei fishtim srikos v'orgim choroi v'hoyu sho soster medukaim kol osei secher agmei nofesh. All these psukim we'll read now in English. What these psukim describe on the complete economic downfall of, quote unquote, our prototype example, Egypt. Egypt's parnasa depends upon the Nile. Egypt is a place that doesn't get rain, much rain. And the Torah describes this in Chumash Devorah. Loch Eretz Mitzrayim he. Eretz Yisrael is not like Eretz Mitzrayim. Eretz Yisrael depends on God constantly every day for rain. When there's no rain here, we start fasting, we start davening. Mitzrayim has another system of irrigation. The Nile overflows, and the Egyptians had built arteries off the Nile. We see this from Pasha Shemos. Parshas for Aaron. The blood makkah. The water traveled all through Mitzrayim with blood, because once the Nile became bloodied, all the arteries that they connected into the Nile, with which they used to irrigate fields, all of them became blood. Ya'orod, that the Agamim, all these type of waterways that had their source at the Nile. And these psukim, which we'll read in English in a moment, describe what's going to happen to the Nile. Basically, it's going to dry up. And when the Nile, the source of parnasa from Mitzrayim, the source of its economic power, dries up, there will not be fishing. And we have now the economic domino effect, which America and the world is witnessing. You take one industry out of the dominoes and they all begin to fall. So if people people don't have money, they don't buy houses. If you don't buy a house, there's less construction. If there's less construction, less bricks are sold, less windows are sold, less steel is sold. So the steel industry is hurt, the window industry is hurt, the brick industry is hurt, the cement industry is hurt. If the cement industry is hurt, cement workers get laid off. If they get laid off, etc., 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 etc. It's a domino effect when there's an interconnection between industries. And so once the Nile dries up, there's no fields, there's no water, there's no fishing. And if there's no fishing, nobody has to buy fish nets. If no one has to buy any fish nets, the manufacturers who sew the fish nets, they're out of business too. And that's what these psukim are describing. A complete economic collapse based upon the domino effect. The Nile falls, and there's a whole list of things that begin to fall with it. So let's read the English now. Verse 3 on page 143. The spirit of Egypt will be emptied within it, and I will confound their counsel. They will inquire of the false gods, of the sorcerers, of the necromancers, and of the diviners. They will not be able to get answers from, quote unquote, their wise men. They're going to go to their sorcerers and their witchcraft to try to get answers. I will deliver Egypt in the hands of a harsh master, and a strong king will rule them. The word of Hashem, master of legions. The waters of the sea will recede. The water will dry out and be parched. The rivers will be abandoned, and waters in the deep canals will be diminished and dry up. The reeds and the bulrushes will wither. The vegetation near the Nile and the bank of the Nile and everything planted alongside the Nile will dry up. Page 145 will wither, and be no more. The fishermen will lament. Well, they're out of business, the fishermen. So they're lamenting. But now the domino. And all those who cast their hooks in the Nile will mourn. No business, no fish. Those who spread nets on the water will be bereaved. There are two types of fishermen. There are fishermen that fish with nets and fishermen that fish with hooks. Both of them are out of business. Ashamed will be those who work at combing flax and weaving nets. These people who comb flax, which is used for netting, and those who weave the nets, quote unquote, they'll be ashamed because they'll be jobless and they will suffer economic ruin. The foundations of its fish pools will be battered. All the dammed calm pools will be depressed in spirit. The Egyptians used to build dams around the Nile for different reasons to control the flow of water. You won't need the dams anymore because there won't be any water. And those people who build dams, they'll be out of business. And all the materials you need to build the dam are not needed anymore. So those people who make the materials to build the dams are out of business. The builders of the dams are out of business. The people who fish in the water are out of business. The people who make the nets for the fishing are out of business. The people who make the hooks for fishing are out of business. This is the economic domino effect of God striking the Nile. And then everything else just falls apart. Pasuk Yud Aleph, page 144. Ach evilim sorei tzoan, chachmei yoatzei paro, eitza nevora, ech tomru el paro ben chachomim, ani ben malchi kedem. Ayom eifo chachamecha v'yagidu noloch, v'yedu mo yoatz Hashem tzevokos al Mitzrayim. Noalu sorei tzoan, Nishu Sore Nov, Hisu Es Mitzrayim, Pinas Shivateha. These psukim are describing that all the wise men, all the government officials in this great Egyptian kingdom, this prototype kingdom, they will have no answers to how to solve the economic problems. They'll have no answers how to solve the human crisis within their borders. Hashem Mosach Bekirba Ruach Ivim. We'll get to this pasuk in a moment. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to send confusion and insanity to this Egyptian prototype exile. The people are going to start going insane. There's going to be a disease that's going to make them go insane. God's going to spread a disease that's going to make people go insane. If you take a look in Rashi on page 146, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 5 lines. Rashi, Ivim. What's an Ivim? What God's going to send an Ivim? Shem Choli. It's the name of a disease. Shel Tiruf Hadas, of some kind of mental confusion. Brings about insanity. People go meshuggah. Back to the Pasuk. Top line, page 146. V'hisuas Mitzrayim b'chol maseyu ki ta'ot shikor b'ki'o. V'lo yeh l'Mitzrayim ma'aseh asher yaseh rosh v'zonav kippah v'agon. Let's go back to page 145, English. So we had the economic destructions, the Nile and the domino effect. Now the government officials, these wise people, quote unquote, who were elected, etc., and they're the brightest, not anymore. And these people are supposed to be the representatives of the people. They're not going to have any answers. Page 145, verse 11. The officers of Zoan are but fools. Zoan was the capital of the Egyptian Empire. Paro's wisest advisors offer boorish counsel. How can you say to Paro, I am the son of wise men, the descendant of the kings of Europe? Where are they? Where are your wise men? Let them tell you now, let them try to know what Hashem, master of legions, has planned for Egypt. The officers of Zoan have become foolish. The officers of another large city, Mitzrayim, have become misguided. The cornerstones of her tribes, page 147, have caused Egypt to stray. Hashem has poured out into her midst a spirit of insanity, and they have caused Egypt to stray in all their actions as a drunkard strays in his vomit. Person gets drunk, la'aleinu, and he's walking and barely walk a straight line, and he throws up. He doesn't even know what he's doing, and he continues walking through his vomit, and if he can't keep his balance, he falls face first into his own vomit. This is what the situation is going to look like. There's going to be such confusion and such lack of understanding, basically an insanity, a drunkardness, that people are going to literally walk around mentally drunk, not understanding what's happening around them, not being able to be advised by the wise men who have gone insane as well, and people walking around drunk and falling in their own vomit. In other words, people get drunk, they vomit, they have now created a mess. And then they fall face first into their mess. So not only do you create the mess, you fall into your own mess. You create the mess, and then you fall into it. There will be nothing that the Egyptians can do, the head or the tail, the canopy tree or the reed. One more pasuk, verse 16 in the Hebrew, page 146. Vayomahu yeh Mitzrayim kanoshim v'chorad upochem leitnubas yad Hashem tzavokos asher hu meinif olov. 147, the English, on that day Egypt will be like women. Women are not the greatest warriors, and the great Egyptian army, they will turn into women. They will not have the courage to fight. It will tremble and fear before the wave of the hand of Hashem, master of legions, which he will wave. Next pasuk, Yud Zayin, page 146. V'hoyisa admas Yehuda leMitzrayim l'choga kol asher yasker osa elov yifchad le'atzas Hashem tzavok asher hu yoetz olah. The land of Yehuda will be a source of fright for Mitzrayim. Remember the captives of Mitzrayim, the captives, the Egyptian armies that were captured by Sancheriv up north, when they were fighting Sancheriv, they brought down back to Yerushalayim, to the siege of Yerushalayim, and they watched the whole Assyrian army die. And now when they go back to Egypt, everybody's shivering about this kingdom in Yehuda. We don't understand what's going on here. They don't have an army, they have a small walled city, and the whole Assyrian army that just defeated Egypt and Cush, they all died in their sleep. And when you mention now Yehuda to an Egyptian, he gets scared. When anyone mentions it to Egypt, you mention Yehuda to an Egyptian, it will fear, because of the counsel of Hashem, master of legions, that he devises against it. We're going to stop here for the day in the Psukim. Let's go back to page 145. We say that first Yeshaya prophesies about the economic domino effect. No Nile, everything else collapses. Then Yeshaya said there'll be no wise men to help you. The next set of Psukim. So the Art Scroll gives us that summary on page 145, verse 11, the second paragraph. Now Yeshaya mocks the Egyptians' wise men who will not correctly assess the danger as it hovers over their country. What you want, a wise man that is going to be part of a government, if he can tell you what today's news is, he's not one of your wise men. You elect the wise men to be able to understand the present and help chart a course for the country and its people for the future. So these quote-unquote wise men will keep completely clueless about what's about to happen to Egypt and will not take any necessary precaution to save the Egyptian empire. At many turning points in histories, leaders and counselors were blind to understand the portent of events. All over history, those who are students of history, great men, great leaders, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was metapesh them. HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs history. And when HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to chart a course, change a course, he is metapesh. He literally puts stupidity in the heads of people, the heads of the leaders, so they don't understand what's right in front of them, and therefore they can't assess what to do in the future. If you don't understand what's going on today, you can't assess how to deal with tomorrow. So at many turning points in history, leaders and councils were blind to understand the portent of events. Wise men, quote unquote, tend to see the present through the lens of the past. And that's a dangerous, quote unquote, wise man. You need a wise man who can see the present. He understands the present because of past events, but then he can plan for the future. He's not stuck in the past. Maybe we'll see that a little bit later today in the Rav Kook in Shuvah. You can't get stuck in the past. Time is moving. World events are moving. The past is going to teach you about what to do in the future as you move through the present. So it was that Paro and his advisors were confident that Egypt would remain a world power and can never be eclipsed or defeated. America can never fall. Never. Even though people of our age, I don't know how old all the viewers are, the listeners are, but people who are my age remember very clearly that Soviet Union, for whom when we were children, we used to practice going under our desks in elementary school. This is a test only. I forgot what they called it. There was some government agency in America that ran radio tests to make sure you were prepared in case, chas v'sholom, the Russians dropped a nuclear or atomic bomb on America, and you went under your desks. Apartment buildings, just like today in Eretz Yisrael, apartment buildings in America, you don't see the signs, but we know when, chas v'sholom, there's a missile, you go into a building, hopefully there's a bomb shelter, a machsan, a fortified machsan, mamad room. On the front of the apartment building in which I lived growing up, there was a huge sign, and the sign on, I forgot the government agency, but said, this is an official, I forgot what it is. There was a huge fortified basement in this building, and this was a place where people can run into in case the Soviets had dropped a nuclear or atomic weapon on the United States of America. And we recall that Soviet Union, it was a matter of days, fallout shelter, thank you, fallout shelter. And there was a government agency that had an emblem, I forgot what it was called, but it was on these signs. And that Soviet Union, which we all shivered from, and America was already in state of plans in case we ever get bombed by the Soviet Union. It took a matter of weeks, maybe less than that. Ronald Reagan said, Mr. Gorbachev, take this wall down, when he stood at the Berlin Wall. And it was very soon after, I don't know what the period of time was, but you had East German students with little hammers starting to hack away at the Berlin Wall. And the East Germans didn't stop them. The Soviets didn't stop them. The wall came down. It was the end of the Soviet Empire, gone. You know, Russia and the satellite states, whatever Russia's become today, but the Soviet Empire is no longer. The Soviet Empire, for those who remember, the invasion of Czechoslovakia, there was a whole set of satellite states that were not even satellite states. It was just an arm of the Soviet Union. And when you didn't behave, they marched tanks into Prague. That's how the world looked like. And that Soviet Union collapsed. But nobody can imagine America can collapse. It can't happen. Because America is a democracy, and America is a this, and America is a that, and America is a this, and America has a constitution, America has free elections, America has this, America has that. And everybody who is watching what's happening in America understands V'sichsachti America ba'America. The Rebbeinu Shalom has set some kind of situation up here where it's American against American. There's civil strife in the streets. People are killing each other. People are burning down other people's businesses. People are burning down entire cities. And the wise men have no answer to this. The quote-unquote wise men. Because the wise men, the quote-unquote wise men, the wise men that Art Scroll puts in quote-unquote, they just don't get it. If I put in the words, so it was that the Americans and their advisors were confident that America would remain a world power and can never be eclipsed or defeated. Their wisdom was proven to be foolish. No, it can't be. So let's read it again. So it was that the Soviet Union and its advisors were confident that the Soviet Union would remain a world power and can never be eclipsed or defeated. Their wisdom was proven to be foolish. We all understand the words fit in perfectly. Soviet Union, the idea that it can never fall, was a foolish idea. It fell. But nobody wants to put the word America in there. And God forbid, I'm not wishing America anything bad. I'm reading Perek of Yeshaya, and there are world events that are happening in America and all over the world. And if the Abarbanel tells us that chapter 19 is the Perek that's talking about something happening, boiling, bubbling in the days of Mashiach, and therefore all these words Mitzrayim do not necessarily mean geographic Mitzrayim. We need to understand and not just live in the past. Quote unquote, those wise men, they don't understand the portent of events. We need to understand the events that are happening all around us. Let's go now to page 147, verse 14 in the Art Scroll commentary. Hashem has poured out into her midst the spirit of insanity. Our translation of Ruach Ivim follows Rashi, who says that it is a sickness that causes one's mind to become confused. And we'll leave it at that. Next, Kihit ot shikur bekio, as a drunkard strays into his vomit. Yeshaya compares the hopelessly confused leaders to a drunkard who throws up his food and drink, and in the drunken state wanders into his vomit and falls into the filth. I'm skipping the next paragraph. The leaders of Egypt become intoxicated with the delusion of their wisdom, that their wisdom would protect them. Instead, God caused them to be like a drunkard who is so inebriated that he actually drinks his own vomit, and that's the Pirush Hamalbim. Last art scroll on this page. When anyone mentions it to Egypt, it will fear. The very name of Yehuda will then cause them to be frightened. For if mighty Assyria fell before Yehuda, how fearsome must Yehuda be, and therefore the Egyptians will fear B'nai Yisrael. Or the Goyim will fear B'nai Yisrael when they see the miracles. Okay, that's the first part of chapter 19. Lineda, next week we'll take a look at the next part of chapter 19, which discusses this tshuva, quote unquote, that the Egyptians do and come close to God.